Join me as I share my journey from getting fired to growing my World Leaders podcast to 10 million listeners. I still remember the day I got fired from my job like it was yesterday. I was sitting in my boss's office, hearing the words that would change my life forever. It was a shock, but it ended up being the best thing that ever happened to me. Little did I know that this unexpected turn of events would lead me to create a podcast that would reach 10 million listeners. Losing my job was a huge emotional blow. I felt like I'd lost a part of myself and my identity was shattered. I went through a phase where I questioned my self-worth and felt like a failure. The days that followed were dark, and I struggled to get out of bed. I felt like I'd lost direction and didn't know what to do with my life. The fear of uncertainty was overwhelming, and I couldn't help but wonder what the future held. Financially, things were tough too. I had to rely on my savings to get by, and the uncertainty of when my next paycheck would come was daunting. I had to cut back on expenses and make some tough decisions about what was essential and what wasn't. It was a difficult time, but I knew I had to keep pushing forward. I started to focus on my passion project, a podcast about world leaders. I'd always been fascinated by politics and world events, and I thought, why not combine those interests into a podcast? I threw myself into research and preparation, reading everything I could about different leaders and their styles. I spent hours thinking about the format, the tone, and the guests I wanted to feature. It was a daunting task, but I was determined to make it work. The early days of my podcast were tough. I faced rejection from potential guests, struggled with audio quality, and worked crazy hours to get everything just right. There were times when I doubted myself and wondered if it was all worth it. But I kept going, driven by my passion for the subject and my determination to succeed. I remember the day I launched my podcast like it was yesterday. I was nervous, excited, and terrified all at once. I pushed the publish button, and my podcast was live for the world to hear. The response was overwhelming, people loved it. The feedback was amazing, and I started to gain traction. It was a slow build at first, but eventually, my podcast started to gain momentum. And then, it happened, I hit 10 million listeners. It was surreal, and I couldn't believe it. Hitting 10 million listeners was a game changer for me. It was vindication that all the hard work, the late nights, and the early mornings were worth it. It was a reminder that resilience and adaptability are key to success. I learned that even in the darkest of times, there's always a way forward. And I realized that sometimes, getting fired can be the best thing that ever happens to you. In conclusion, getting fired from my job and starting my World Leaders podcast was a journey of self-discovery, resilience, and determination. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it. I hope you guys can take something away from my story and apply it to your own lives. If you faced a similar challenge, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. And if you want to check out more of my content, be sure to check out my other video on. Thanks for watching.